That's good.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar on the benefits of quality feedback. And with us tonight, we have Neil Peake, our president, and the vice president, Nick Hibbert, with us this evening. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Ed, and good evening, everybody.
And welcome to everybody that's joined us this evening. And what we're going to do is we're going to kick off straight away with Neil. And if you could just I'll go through the goals. With the goals that what we're going to look at this evening is we're going to look at being able to understand the different styles of feedback that you can give, understand what we mean by teacher-centered learning, and look at what that means. Moving forwards from teacher-centered learning and the method of feedback with that, we're going to look at a step forward from that towards client-centered feedback, which is positive feedback. And then we're going to be looking at client-centered feedback and how you then elicit through that. You can elicit positive structured feedback, which is really coming from the client and involving the client and getting them to participate in the feedback that's being given. And just before we move forward on this, I'll just notify everybody that we are recording this. We're hoping to sort of use these to put up on a website because the ANJC is just looking at a new website, and that's going to be redone, and we're going to get these videos out on there for everybody to view at a later date. So, moving forward from that, Neil, if you'd just like to do a bit of a brief introduction as to how we're moving forward with this evening.
Yes, how good is your feedback? First of all, you've got to say, what is feedback? Feedback is a way of you knowing whether or not your client is understanding one way or another what you are attempting to achieve or what your client is attempting to achieve. Feedback on the main is usually instructor-led. It's led by the instructor. We're going to talk a little bit more about positive feedback and, of course, quality client-centered learning feedback, which I feel is probably the most important one, although they are all important. That was probably, in my opinion, the most important one.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks a lot. And Nick, if you could go through the instructor-led feedback.
Okay, instructor-led feedback is, as it says there, traditional in education. Very little interaction from the student. So basically the instructor more or less says how the lesson has gone with little to no input from the student, not taking in their feelings, thoughts and considerations. And it doesn't necessarily help the learner in any way, and often there's a lot of more like criticism, but then we get this phrase down here of sandwich, where you can balance it by saying, good, that was well done, but you didn't do this very well, and that's where that expression phrase sandwich comes in, which can be quite belittling and soul-destroying for some students. So it's all very well the instructor having this idea of what they believe, but they're not necessarily listening to the student and understanding how the student thinks and feels and any challenges to their students' beliefs. So they're making the work very hard for themselves, really.
And where do you think this has sort of come from then, Nick, this sort of instructor-led feedback that we're talking about here? Where does it stem from?
I think unfortunately, if we went back to our school days, going back to the 50s or 60s, if you can go that far back, Ed, I'm sure Neil can, that was very much the way teachers taught in those days. And I think the DVSA and the Part 3 exam unfortunately still runs along those lines, where it's all looking at faults and criticism, and very little feedback comes back from the examiner when he or she is in role. And I think they find that quite I'll use the word difficult to do, although that's not the best phrase to use. And of course, that comes back to how they're trained initially to do the role play, and they don't want to be put in a corner, as it were. And so I think the DVSA and a lot of the examiners are reluctant to probably go down the correct route, which we will be looking at later on, of client-centered learning. So my belief is that it comes back mainly, a lot of instructors have been taught that way in the first place, and we've got to break that mold really and change the style. And I know a lot of driving instructors have done that. We've got lots of different words for coaching over the period of time, but I think we have moved quite a long way, or a lot of instructors have moved a long way towards doing a much better job for their clients and getting their clients to understand what they're doing, and it says challenge their beliefs and feelings, but I still think there's a lot of driving instructors out there that don't ask the student, well, how did you feel about that? How did stalling at that junction there make you feel? And the traditional instructor-led way of doing it won't probably tackle that way of dealing with the situation. They'll probably just say, oh, you brought the clutch up too fast, restart the engine, put it back into gear, let's go. There's not a lot of thought and help there.
I think another thing that from the research I've done into it as well, and just sitting in there with instructors that use this sort of method of feedback when I'm watching people teach, is that it tends to be very skill focused as well, doesn't it? It's all about the skills when the instructor's giving feedback like this, and it is quite difficult to personally give any feedback as the trainer about thoughts and beliefs, because you don't know what they're thinking or believing. You're guessing, really, aren't you?
Yes, to a certain extent, but my example there of somebody stalling at the traffic lights would be the instructor saying, oh, you know, what do you think you've done there, or brought the clutch up too fast? And as you say, there's very much thinking about the skill and not necessarily thinking about, well, why did the student bring the clutch up so fast? Were they under pressure? Were they the lead vehicle at the traffic lights? How can we tackle that? How can we get around that? And the traditional way wouldn't be dealing with that. So you get to the next set of traffic lights and they're likely to do the same thing again. And I think sometimes, and everyone who's online with us at the moment can shoot me down here if they wish, but I think that's sometimes where pupils, you get them from other schools and they say, oh, my instructor was shouting at me, because the instructor's getting frustrated with it, because he's not really dealing and tackling with the issue, the true issue of what's going on.
Yeah, it's like, look, sorry, go on, Neil.
Yeah, I was just going to add the fact that if somebody, as Nick said, stalled at the lights, find out what the problem is and ask the client how they think they could improve on it.
Yeah.
Which is making them think all the time. You know, it's so everybody stalls, but shouting, thing of the past, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. There's still some instructors out there that might do it. What I'm trying to say is that if you allow the student to frustrate you in that way, because really it's the instructor's fault and not trying to find out why is this student stalling so many times, what is it? And the instructor should think back, what am I missing? What have I missed? How can I tackle this differently? But if you're instructor-led and you've been trained that way, then it's very hard for a lot of instructors trained that way and over many years, and that's not a criticism necessarily, but change can be quite difficult for some people to install. They don't like change, basically. It is to some instructors, it's a completely different environment and a way of talking to the client.
Yeah, and yes, it's quite difficult to change, isn't it? Especially if you've done something in a long way for a long time. There's a very old saying, you can never straighten an ancient oak tree, but you could straighten a sapling and make it grow where you want. And starting from an early stage with more of a CCL base is going to be easier to adapt, isn't it?
I wouldn't all agree with that point of view personally, simply because I'm an old dog and I changed not too many years ago. And yes, you have to accept that there are easier ways of teaching people to drive. I used to come home totally exhausted, probably 30, 40 years ago, and wondered why I felt so bad. And it was because I was doing all the work. I was doing all the telling. And of course, I then realized that I needed to understand more about how the client learned. So I then went off to college for 2 years and found out all sorts of things that I was doing wrong.
So you say you found it easier coaching then, Neil, rather than and getting the client to actually talk about their experience rather than you trying to second guess and give your methods of trying to solve solutions. It's easier to get the client to find the solution.
That's absolutely right. It amazed me how, as I said, at the end of the day, I felt so much better because it'd been all up to them. They had to. I could guide them into the solution, but at the end of the day, I wasn't doing all the telling. To be quite honest, I would say that now I would probably tell somebody in about 5% of cases, not much more than that. And they would have to be a different type of clientele for me to tell anybody what to do.
Yeah, for people out there that are maybe this is the first time they've come across anything like this, or they're just starting on the road of coaching, what sort of clients have you found that don't take to this? And it's that 5% bracket. What are they? What bracket would you say that they fall into?
Usually they're professionals. It sounds strange. They are. They've never been left. Well, I say never, to do things on their own, to think for themselves. It's not a definite category. They are different. There are different types of person. So you cannot categorize somebody's personality, somebody's way of learning, somebody's intelligence. You and I all know that the guy come out of the garage, has left school without any qualifications, and he picks up driving in 10 minutes, say. He can drive a car. You might get somebody else who leaves with all sorts of academic qualifications, and that can take them 100 lessons. Yeah. You just don't know.
Because the one thing that the one thing that I've found personally, when people have because some people actually want that feedback given to them, don't they? And they want to accept that. And quite often when you look at those people, I've found that quite a few of them are the academics, the ones that do a lot of reading and they're self-evaluations. They're not into self-evaluation. They take things more from a literal point of view and soak up information that way, rather than turning to be solution-based.
Yes, I agree with you, 100%. Yeah. Nick, what's anything else on that?
No, I was just looking to see if anyone wants to type a little message. Have you just explain, Ed, how they can do that for us?
Yeah, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll have a GoToWebinar control panel. And on that control panel there'll be a questions box. And if you click into the questions box, you'll be able to type in a question there, and it'll come up on my screen, and then we can ask one of the presenters to answer your question there. So type away if you've got any questions that you would like answering, and we'll answer those as we go through the evening. There's also I've just seen it flick up there. Somebody's just found this button. There's a hand button where you can raise a hand. That one's a little bit more difficult for me to see all the time. Questions do work slightly better. The reason that we tend not to use the hand button is that not everybody is able to speak, and we've had a few instances where people have put their hand up to talk and it's not really worked, and for some reason or other it's easier just to type the questions in. So any questions, we'll ask those. So
that was
go on, Nick.
Sorry, that was the reason I was asking that, because I'm sure there's ADIs who have logged in with us now that probably can reflect back on when they were trained however long ago, and doing the part 3 exam and the sort of feedback that you had to give the examiner. And of course that sticks with you because that's how a lot of people were trained. And we were having this discussion yesterday at the end of our coaching workshop that we did, that even Lynn Barry, she was saying, I find it so alien now to try and teach people the part 3 exam. It just doesn't feel right anymore. And you are almost, unfortunately, teaching people to get through an exam. And we all know that the standards check isn't anything like the part 3 exam. So the whole thing's a bit of a mismatch. The part 3 exam is very much instructor-led. Still.
Very much. Still. Yes,
I was just wondering whether anyone would agree or say their views and just type that up to us and how we think we can help DVSA sort of change that exam, because it can't carry on the way it is. It's not fit for purpose. It hasn't been for a long time.
No, it's not been for a long time, has it? Not been fit for purpose. No. And it's quite a difficult one to get a solution to when we've got this. It's like a two-tiered approach, isn't it? Well, it is a two-tiered approach, and it's quite awkward. We've just had a pupil. We've got a question here. Just while I have a look at this question, Nick, the last bullet point on here is about how instructor-led feedback might affect the pupil themselves and the way that the pupil thinks about how the lesson's going and how the feedback's being delivered. Do you want to just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, really, again, it comes back to the instructor is making his or her mind up of why that student's made this mistake. And unfortunately, most of the time, they're only looking for mistakes. So they're being critical. So if somebody's always criticizing you, you're going to feel quite small or belittled. You might not even want to come out on your next driving lesson. You might think, oh, maybe I should change driving instructors, or I'm not enjoying this lesson. At the end of the lesson, they want to be able to come back and have more, that the lesson that they had wasn't long enough and they want another one. But if they get out of the car thinking, oh, that's like being hit over the head with a baseball bat, and just being criticized and almost bullied, if you like, into how they are being made to feel. So they're not being made to feel well for the simple reason the instructor doesn't ask them. So it's, and like it's just not challenging their beliefs. So why do they believe in these certain things? What makes them think that way? But the instructor's not digging deep enough. And as you're saying about like the stalling at the traffic lights, go deeper into not the mechanics of it, not why did the person bring the clutch up in that fashion. The thought processes to it are much deeper, and that's where instructor-led is missing that very, very much.
Yeah.
So that's where I would say, how does it make the driver think, feel, and challenge their beliefs? It probably, in a lot of cases, doesn't, and comes out in a very negative way.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. Right. We've got the question here is, and it's a very popular one, this one. We had this one actually as well yesterday, Nick. And I'll just go to you first of all, if I can, Nick, with this one. If a pupil, when asked for feedback, replies with, I don't know, what do you do next? What do you do next? We're chuckling away, Frank, because it came up on yesterday's coaching course, and we had quite a long discussion about this one as to how to get around that. So, good question.
Okay, there are various ways we can deal with it, and sometimes we did come to the conclusion that it can sometimes be actually left alone. And if the pupil says they don't know, then you could leave it. Or if you want to find out why they don't know that they did something, is to find out their feelings and views on that statement. Not necessarily, oh, you went to pull out in front of that vehicle, why did you do that? Oh, I don't know. Look at it and challenge it from a different perspective. How did they feel? What were they thinking? As opposed to, oh, you misjudged that, which again is being very critical of someone if they do it that way. So, would you agree, Ed? And that's one way of dealing with the.
It is. It's one of many ways, though, isn't it? Quite often with this one, I've found this one mainly comes from when the people are very early starters with you, or they've come from another trainer who's been using instructor-led feedback. and it's that spoon-fed sort of situation where they've just been given the answers all the time, and quite often people are in that sort of situation where they just expect to be told, and they feel maybe awkward about coming back with phrases, being shy. There's all sorts of different things, isn't there? How do you tackle it, Neil?
I tackle it reasonably simply by, on the first lesson, explaining all about self-assessment whilst you're learning to drive. And anything that they do wrong, ask them quite simply. I say anything they do wrong, anything that, like the stall, mark yourself out of 10. How do you think that went? How do you think we can improve on it? Shall we try it? And away we go. How did it go? Did it go any better? Did it go any worse? Until gradually they start from the bottom, 2, 3, 4, and work themselves up to the top 9 or 10.
Yeah. So scaling works really well. Yeah, scaling's a great way of it's a great way of getting around it with scaling, and especially if the scale they're feeling as well. If they're feeling nervous, anxious, or something like that, what's making them anxious, and where are they on the scale with being rushed or things like that? So yeah, that's great.
This brings in an awful lot of motivation. It motivates the client to try and get that little bit higher each and every time.
Yeah. So
also the I don't. Oh, sorry, Ed. Also the I don't know is they might be reluctant to say because they're going to sound a bit stupid or they think they're going to get a wrong answer. And I'll always say to students, it doesn't matter what the answer is and what you say, because I might not have heard that version before, and I'll think, wow, I'd have never thought of that. That was brilliant. So sometimes it's great to get them to answer you, but there is that reluctance.
Yeah, I feel the whole object is to get inside their head, so you know exactly what they're thinking.
Yeah,
it's quite often when they start expressing how they're feeling and thinking, that helps them move forward, because it's like they're getting it out there, aren't they? They're getting rid of that feeling.
Yeah.
So hopefully,
does that answer our?
I was just going to say that. Yeah. Yeah. If Frank, if you can just put as yes or a no for that, or if you want to ask further question on that, hopefully that's given you some ideas there. Trevor, we've got your question here.
Ed, was there a name with that one?
Yeah, Frank Ward.
All right.
So Trevor has asked one, when is feedback a good time? And I think that we might answer that one a little bit later on, because we've got quite a few different questions coming in here. Just while I have a look at this.
If I can step in and
go on.
Before that, the traditional way for a lot of driving instructors doing the feedback is almost at the end of the lesson. They'll recap, if you like, it's a recap session right towards the end of the lesson. And of course, most students can't remember what happened in the first 5 minutes. So it's not a lot of value to it, because the student can't really reflect that far back. We're trained to do it. We can remember probably the lesson before and everything that went on in it. Learner drivers have got so much to think about, they can't really absorb that sort of thing. So leaving it too late in the lesson to give that sort of feedback is very negative anyway.
That could often lead to that I don't know as well. If it's too late, that's quite a common one where people will say I don't know because they've just moved on so far. I've had it where we've had a stretch of road and you've not been able to pull up for a minute or so, and you pull up and stop and you say, can you remember the incident that happened a minute or two back? And they go, yeah, bits of it, but not very well. So sometimes it has to be quite soon sometimes, does feedback, doesn't it? Which is what I think Trevor was talking about there. And that we'll try and get round to that question a little later on. We've got some other questions coming in. Thanks, I will try it, Frank's put, so that's good. We've maybe answered that question well. We've got 2 other questions that have come in. I'm just going to go through this bit, otherwise we might just get caught up with asking the questions, and we'll do a bit of a question and answer session later on. But keep the questions coming in and we'll come back to them. I just wanted to run through very quickly the next step from instructor-led. It's moving towards giving more positive feedback and moving away from the sandwich sort of event of where you give them something good, then the bad, and then something good again. Because quite often when you hit them with the bad, they're deflated and you can never pick them back up again, and the rapport tends to break a little bit. Whereas if you try to keep things a little bit more on the positive side and you make things very personal to them, so you're telling them things that have gone really well, because quite often a lot of the driving has gone really well and there's just one tiny little section that we want to focus on. So you could start by being quite personal as to how well they're driving and give them some good feedback, and maybe even ask an odd question to get them to think and evaluate about how they're doing that, which is a step closer towards giving more client-centered feedback. And above all, one of the most important things, if you do step into giving feedback, be honest. There's no use actually saying something that making it all flowery and look really good and it's just not been there, because if you're not honest with them, they're going to see right through you. And being positive with that feedback is another thing, and look at how that can move forward. Yeah, so yes, something has gone wrong, but what can we learn from that experience and how can we move forward to be more positive? And along with being positive, being specific as well. So identify exactly what it is that you want to work on and look at those positive aspects that maybe they've done and they can develop further, such as one person today I had was coming out of a hill junction, which was quite well closed as well off to the right hand side, very open to the left, could see quite a long way down the road, so very clear. And as they were using some really good clutch control to come out of the hill, they saw a parked car just down the road and they thought the car was moving because they looked too quickly, and they tried to rush out because it was a bit of a distance away. They tried to then rush and the clutch came up too quick, stalled, so we got them started again. They then recognised that the car wasn't moving and they calmed down again, and they actually got themselves moving really well on first attempt at the coming out of the junction after the stall. When we pulled up and talked about it, what we looked at are the positives of how they would move away, and I got them thinking about, through questions, about how they'd actually come to move away from the side of the road or go around a parked car or even pull out of a junction when they see something coming normally when they're not on a hill. And we looked at all those specific details about how they move away there, which kept it honest, personal, positive and specific, but it was all more client-centered as well. So that's how that can be used as positive feedback. And for those that are just coming into more of a client-centered teaching approach from being mainly instructor-led, that's possibly a good step forward for you to start to think about using that, and use those 4 points there to help you base how you're, and it gives you like a model to work with that helps you move forward in your feedback. Have either of you guys got anything you want to say about that one? Neil?
I need to say that often use the student's name. They have got a name. I mean, at the beginning of a driving test, the examiner introduces his or herself and says their name and asks if, do you mind if I call it? When you're talking to them and giving them feedback, actually use their name. Not all the time, but certainly remember to use their name. They are your client. They are paying for your dinner to be on your table. So
can I just add to that? There was a time when I was told by an SE that I was being too personal by calling them by their Christian names.
Yeah, but times have moved on since then, Neil, haven't they?
I know, yeah.
Mr. Peak.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Right.
Anything else to add on that one? No?
No, other than, of course, we know that often instructors will just say the word good when it wasn't really good. I don't know, that the pupil clips the curb and they might have got round the corner and then they say that was good, and what was good about it? So where you're saying being honest, pupils aren't completely stupid. I know you're trying to make them feel a bit better, but as you say, Ed, you've got to make sure that you're being honest, and they've got to be honest back with themselves as well. Because at the end of the
that's
day,
it,
we're teaching a life skill that's going to make sure that they survive out here. To me, that's my job, to put people on the road that are not going to die in the first week they get out in a car on their own.
Can I just come in there and say, quite recently I've sat in the back with an ADI who done exactly what you said, Nick, throughout the whole lesson while he was teaching a pupil. It was, oh, that was very good. That was good. Oh, brilliant. You know, and I'm thinking to myself, this guy's on a different planet. And he really was. It was full of praise. And the pupil at the end of that lesson probably did get out feeling they'd done well. But they hadn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's misguided, isn't it? Really misguided, especially then if the learner starts to believe that.
Yes. Yeah.
There does come a point, if you're told enough times that you're good at something and you're not, that you will start to believe you are, even if you thought you weren't. Yeah. So
I do believe it.
You do believe it, dear? Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got Daniel's just coming with this point here. Sometimes you have learners who do not do a lot of talking, and a two-way feedback doesn't bring out all the learners' understanding and thoughts. And you try to engage them in many different ways and dig deeper. You're just faced with that one answer, I don't know. And yeah, sometimes it does take a lot of doing, but it's perseverance as well, because it's a transfer of responsibility, isn't it? We haven't really talked about that much as yet, but within the feedback, I don't know if you guys agree with this, but my feeling is it's getting the learner to accept the responsibility of their own learning and how they're going to do that in the future once they've passed their test. They've got to start to evaluate and reflect on their own driving, and that's really what the feedback's all about, isn't it?
Yes, taking responsibility and making them understand that they are responsible for their actions, and certainly will be when they're sitting in a car on their own and there's nobody else sitting there with them.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons why the DSA have now taken this on board in a very, very serious way, because they know that with the number of young deaths on the road each year, this method will hopefully reduce the number of young people being killed on our roads. And that's one of the basic reasons why we are doing this now.
And that number's starting to go back up again now, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is.
Yeah. Sorry, were you going to say something? Neil?
What I was going to say is how much has it gone up? Because there's certainly many more learner drivers on the road and younger drivers on the road now than there was probably 3-4 years ago. I don't know how much has it gone up by.
I can't honestly remember what the figures are, and that's just something that I've just thought back to. Maybe somebody out there who can actually get on the internet might actually come back and just type in the question there. If somebody can get onto Google and just Google those statistics, that would be quite an interesting one just to see again. Unfortunately, I can't do anything with my internet to get those figures back. But I think it's by a few hundred that it's gone up. Some of them have gone up an odd percent or so, and they're saying that could be just fluctuations in, you know how when they do the figures, they give like a bit of a theory behind it. But there was one of the figures that had gone up quite substantially, and I'm not sure if it wasn't the motorbikes one that had gone up quite substantially, and they were looking at that. So,
right.
But yeah, it had taken a bit of an upward turn.
Well, if we go back to Daniel's thing, you'll get pupils like trying to get blood out of a stone. Something we mentioned yesterday, and then you said a different slant on it, Ed, and that was, I suggested that there's always pupils that are interested in sport, or they're interested in music. They've got some hobby or some interest. Try and engage them in the conversation, having that, at least that might break the ice. Even bring their music. I'll even say to students, bring the music. I don't mind. I'll listen to anything. You took that was one way of doing it. You had a different slant on that though, Ed, didn't you?
now you're asking me to think back. I've slept since then, and I was tired yesterday. I can't honestly think of anything just off the top of my head that I might have said there. But the one thing that I've just taken up on that point that you've done, when you use something like that, quite often you can relate something in driving to something that they do in sport. Sport's a really good one, actually. I've used that quite a few times. But it's like looking at how you would move forward in sport. If something went wrong, what would you do if you were doing this in your particular hobby? How would you get over that, and what would you do differently? So that's quite a good one to get people to talk, isn't it then? Because they've got something that they really know about then. And we were looking at, in the early stages of goal setting yesterday, we talked about the conscious states of mind in learning. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you know you didn't know it. Now that takes getting some head round, but it comes into that if you don't know something you don't know about, then you can't really give an answer to that. So it could.
Well, that's the unconscious incompetence, as they call it, isn't it?
It is, yes. Yeah, it's the first stage of learning. And quite often with our learners, as much as I've come across it a couple of times where they've come from families that haven't got a car in the family. So we really have got zero knowledge to start with. They may have crossed the road and what have you, and they might have been on bikes, but to actually get inside a car, I've had two that have very rarely been in cars. And that's quite interesting when somebody's got really zero knowledge, trying to get them to talk about experiences, because if they're talking about experience and they haven't had it, how can they answer the questions?
Yeah.
God, oh dear, you youngsters. 40 years ago, 50% of our pupils had never got in a car before.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Had no experience. My father never drove. My mother never drove. So, hell, I must be getting old.
But then 40 years ago, we were using instructor-led feedback. So.
Yes.
Well, there wasn't any feedback.
Yeah, maybe no. Okay, Dave.
We want to move on, Neil?
Dave Allen's come in. Sorry, hello. Nick?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, I was just going to come in with Dave Allen's come back with road deaths have increased by about 40. I thought it had gone up more than that, Dave, but if it's 40, it's not quite as significant as I thought. Next slide. I'll come back to the other questions. We're caught up. I think we've just got one more. But we'll come on to that after we've gone through this. Positive feedback. Yeah, we've been through what is meant by positive. We've gone through that, changing the focus to maintain performance and motivation. So we're starting to be more positive about how we can move forwards and do that, moving forwards, talking about experience. Well, we've just been talking about the experiences there from other drivers, leading to positive feelings. So we're looking at now how the thoughts and feelings are maybe slightly better with the pupil. They may be feeling a little bit more involved, not as much left out or being picked on for just that instructor-led feedback. However, even this positive feedback is still mainly instructor-led.
And it's not just asking lots of questions. No. Often I think people think it's asking a lot of questions. That's not necessarily the be-all and end-all.
No, it's not. And the questions mainly want to be focused, like we were talking about yesterday. It's focusing questions that are targeting thoughts, beliefs, and feelings as well. Because if you start being more personal and talking about the thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that somebody has, then you're talking about them and you're getting them involved, and they know about themselves, and that's when they'll probably feel more comfortable talking. So what's the difference with CCL? And Neil, if you want to go through some of that just while I have a read of these questions and see what's come up.
Yes, by all means. Benefits of quality client-centered learning feedback. Now, as we've already said, or I said earlier, your client or your pupil is at the center and must be at the center of all learning. You, as a driving instructor, should remain absolutely non-judgmental whatsoever. It is all about the client's experience, how they're feeling, how they're thinking, how they're responding. There's lots of ways that you can improve their motivation. You, as an instructor, should help the student to evaluate and reflect. Now, the way I get them to evaluate is whatever topic I'm doing, we start at the bottom level, which is 0, and they can gain all marks up to 10. Very rarely does anyone get a 9 or a 10, but it's about them coming up to an improvement each time they have a lesson, and to try harder each time. You, as an instructor, must use open questions and answers to develop a conversation. Now, I normally start the first lesson by driving away to a reasonably quiet spot within 5 to 10 minutes, and by the time I've got to that spot, I usually know all about that client, what they do, what sports they're interested in, whether or not they're married, got a boyfriend, girlfriend, etc., etc. And that's how you start. I've now got them talking, as Nick said earlier, we use Christian names, or whatever name they prefer to be known as. I did have a lady once who wanted me to call her Mrs., so I had to call her Mrs. all the time. Talking about question and answers again, you can always lead the client into giving you the correct answer by giving them little bits, little hints. And so they lead and they find the answer to the question even though you've actually guided them into it. You, as a driving instructor, should listen very carefully. Most instructors don't listen to what the client is asking you. You tend to move on, override the question. But my advice is listen very carefully. Move forward, leave the past behind. And what we mean by that is, so what have you stalled? Forget about it. Let's move on. You've just pulled out at a junction. We know you shouldn't. Let's get away. Let's move on. Let's find out what went wrong and how we can improve it. Ask how the student, how they want you to help. Let me just read that again. Ask how the student, how they want you to help. Sorry, how they want you to help. If they need my help, they can ask for it. Again, I will guide them into whatever help they require, so they will give me the answer and not me give them the answer. It's not about me telling. It's about the client getting the information out of them so it stays within them. Nick, anything to say on that?
Yeah, the part about asking the student how they want you to help. As you say, let's say they've stalled, you can step in and say, how can I help you? Is there any way I can help you with that? What would you like me to help you with? And that's, as you say, Neil, that then gets them thinking about how do they structure that answer that you've put to them. So yeah, very important one. And listening. And of course, a lot of driving instructors, they ask the question and they're nearly giving the student the answer by the time the student's halfway through the answer and they finish the answer off for them. Now, whether that's because of time constraints or what, but you do have to stop, hold back, and just be quiet for a moment and let the student answer the question, even if there's that momentarily pause. In sales, I was always told whoever speaks first usually loses the sale. So when you were trying to sell somebody something, you kept quiet and let the buyer speak first, and then you knew you'd normally won the sale. That's the way I was always trained to do it. And the same in an argument, isn't it? Somebody's arguing with you, one of the best things to do is just stay quiet. Eventually they'll run out of steam and momentum if they haven't hit you before that. And then you can normally come in and you've evaluated what they've said and you can do it more calmly and rationally. So again, it is very, very important for us to listen. And something we do on the coaching course is to show the different levels of listening. Yeah. So, is your wife listening, Neil, at the moment?
Yes, she's listening.
I think women are good at listening. Blokes don't listen much, do they?
We were told that yesterday, weren't we, Nick? Yeah.
We were. I believed it.
You were told about what?
Yeah.
Men are there any more questions coming in?
Yeah, we have. We have Daniel that has quite a good question here. Let me just read this one out from here. So if we go, yeah, he's sort of saying that when the students believing that they're not making mistakes and they've got this false belief that they're doing really well, and you try to correct them honestly, but it comes across as too negative. And he tries to turn it around so that they can see it in a different way, but he's finding that quite often they disengage. And it gets a feeling it's because you're opening a weakness, you're trying to discuss a weakness. And he's asking, how else can you positively engage them without knocking their confidence? And that's a great question. And it's a scenario that I can remember coming up against in my early stages of starting to coach, where I was still being slightly instructor-led in the way that I was getting the engagement with the pupil. And I think that for me, the most important thing that I learned was to stay non-judgmental and don't give my own view of, even though you're trying to be honest and you're trying to be as helpful as possible. And we were talking about this yesterday, where as a trainer, you want to help them in as many ways as possible, and you see that as your role, is why you're there, to help them learn. But it's a difficult one when they actually believe themselves that they're doing really well. Have you guys got any ideas? I mean, remaining non-judgmental and trying to stay independent is quite a challenge sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes I think if they believe they're doing better than they are, is to stay more quiet and put them into certain driving situations that they are going to struggle with, and they're going to probably need your assistance, or you're going to have to step in and assist them, and then you can step back and say, well, how did you feel that went? Do you feel you handled that situation well there? And they've got to be honest, and you can say to them, no, you've got to be honest with yourself there. If I wasn't here and stepped in to assist you, what would have happened next? Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. So I would somebody, if you like, got a little bit too big for their boots, for want of a better way of putting it, I will put them into tough driving situations. I mean, sometimes they can cope with them, and you think, maybe I have got this wrong. Maybe they are better than I thought they were. But most of the time, we know they're not, and you know roads in your area which are more challenging, or times of the day that you could take the student out that would be more challenging for them, and they would then self-reflect on that and think, yeah, that wasn't the best thing to do at that point, whatever it was we're talking about.
I think an important thing to...
Can I just...
Go on, Neil. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just got to say that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the occasional step back into the instructor move or to the telling mood just briefly, because it might get you over a bridge. It might help that person who you do get every now and again, so you have to fall back into a different way to suit that client, but only briefly.
Yeah. And that's getting the balance between the instructing and the coaching, isn't it? I mean, and it's quite a fine art sometimes to actually get that balance spot on. Another good one that I use when I've got clients like this is it involves quite a big discussion, about where are those beliefs coming from? What are they comparing themselves to, and who drives like they're driving? Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a friend, but that they've got a strong belief somewhere, deep rooted, that they're basing their driving skills on. And their driving behavior, and the behavior is controlled by their thoughts, their feelings, and their beliefs. And if you think of this as like a platform, the behavior is a platform, and it's got three legs under it, and the thoughts, beliefs, and feelings are the three legs holding the platform up. If I put my hands like this, you can maybe see the three. So you've got your beliefs on top, and you've got the three thoughts, beliefs, and feelings underneath holding that. Well, it's quite stable with three-legged stool, but as soon as you take one of those away, the platform becomes quite rocky. So if their beliefs are incorrect, there's an instability there, and that belief could be wrong. All the thought process that they're using to navigate their way through things, and maybe there's a conflict of, is there too much going on cognitively for them to think about in certain situations, and they don't actually realize that they're being unsafe as they are. So there's quite a few different ways that you could maybe tackle that by looking at those three supports of behavior, and that's quite an interesting way to sort of move forward with that one.
Yeah, nice fingernails.
The clean. Yeah.
He was going to use a stool, but it wouldn't fit in the camera.
Yeah. We have one in the room actually, a three-legged one. Yeah. So we've no more questions.
Good analogy though, Ed. I like that. That was very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And if anybody else has got any ideas about maybe a way that we can help out with that, or other suggestions that they've found work, type away, and you know, we'll put your suggestions forward as well. So next slide, and I can get my mouse to work. There we go. So Nick, is it?
Yep. So good quality client-centered feedback builds rapport, as we've been speaking about, helping you understand how your client thinks, how they feel, their emotions, their beliefs. This is important. So as it says there, encourages the pupil to explore their own thoughts and beliefs. And as you just said, Ed, if somebody's thinking that they can go for that little narrow gap because they've seen other people do it, you've got to recognise that, you know, that's not the safest way to drive, and maybe the person that normally goes for these little gaps, mum, dad, uncle, brother, or whoever, it's going to come a cropper one day. Encourages self-evaluation, which is what we're saying, giving them a score from 1 to 10, some scaling. That's always a good way to do that. And definitely encourages that responsibility to think, making them think, how safe are they? How would that feel if it was the other way around? And there is, initially, I think a lot of people are reluctant to do a little bit of coaching because they think it's slow in the early days, but actually the long term is the learner learns quicker and does take much more and full responsibility for their actions. So it's having a much more positive attitude towards their driving.
Okay, that's a good summary of the CCL feedback that we've just gone through there. Hopefully that's helped some of you guys there. Whoop, just brought that one up a little bit too quick. So all I would like to do is just see if we've got any more questions. That's get my mouse in the right place. Sorry about that, guys. Right, Nick, just while I go through these, we've got one or two questions just come in.
Okay.
So if you would just like to go through that one, Nick, and just talk about the coaching workshop that we do. And a little bit about what it...
well, yesterday, how was your journey back, Ed? Was it good? Because Ed, of course, lives quite a long way away from Welwyn Garden City, where we are at the moment. I am, anyway. And we did another very successful coaching workshop. This is the second one we've done. The previous one was in Birmingham. It was well attended, and everybody really thoroughly enjoyed their day, felt it was money well spent. Our next one, as you can see from this slide, is in Leeds, May the 16th. So take a note of the phone number there and ring Peter and book your place. After that, it will be Bristol, July the 4th, and then we'll be in Milton Keynes in September. In between these coaching workshops, we'll also be running our standards check workshops, and there isn't really a big overlap between the two. Our standards workshop really does explain about the standards check and what you have to prepare for, and this is a good stepping stone between learning how to do the coaching and going in that direction. But for those of you that might have been on the standards check workshop, the two workshops are a lot different to one another, and this particular workshop is very, very interactive. We try and make both workshops interactive, but this, I would say, is considerably more interactive. Yeah, and we feed you as well. Well, a hotel does anyway. So book your place and have a go. Come along, and you'll meet the team. Neil sometimes attends some of these. You might come up to the Milton Keynes one, Neil. Leeds is probably a little bit too far away, but otherwise meet the team. And on our webinars, you'll meet the other two members of the team who are not here tonight.
No, we've Lynn and Nick away, haven't we, at the moment? So
No, James.
Lynn and James. Sorry, yeah. It's that train journey that did me, Nick.
That long train journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, yes. So we've got reflective learning. Definitely, we've just got somebody that's just typed in. Tony's joined us, Tony Lane, and he's put on reflective learning. Absolutely, that's what we've been talking about here, and it's getting the pupil involved with reflection. Can we get copies of the slides? And thanks for the webinar, guys. Copies of the slides. Are we going to send those out, do you think, guys?
I think they've got copyright on those, haven't they?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we have. Yeah. Just for your information, Frank, when these are going to go live onto our new website that's coming up, so you'll be able to go and view them on there, on the website. Go on, Nick, I think you were going to come in then.
Well, I need to say that I'm not saying those slides exactly word for word are on our coaching workshop, but yeah, if you want to come along to the coaching workshop, be able to have a better look at those slides and go into more detail, because of course it's a whole day workshop, and yes, you'll come away from it knowing more than what you did in the morning. And if you don't, we'll have to have a reflective log as to why you didn't.
Yeah. What's quite interesting here is that Frank's just put a reply onto when I did the 3 legs on driver behaviour, and Frank's actually been on one of Lisa Dawn's courses, Dr. Lisa Dawn, and he was quite familiar with what I was going through there, so he's obviously quite conversed with coaching, and it's nice to see people on these webinars that have been on courses like that still keeping themselves up, and he's put thanks for the reply on that one. Thanks for attending, Frank, and for everybody else that's joined us as well, and I'm sure other people have been on courses with themselves. We have a question here from David Allen, quite an interesting one, this one, quite often comes up. What if pupils score themselves either 10 out of 10 or 12 out of 10? Yeah, so they're scoring themselves quite high.
That's right.
Go on, Neil.
I've never had anybody do 10 out of 10 on everything, but what you then say to them is, do you think that is actually the way you're performing? Do you think that's driving test standard?
So
I hate to use the word
driving test standard.
It's getting them
no,
to
you can usually talk. Yeah. What you can say to them is, where did we start? How do you feel it went? Was it perfect? So do you think you're marking yourself a little bit too high? Are you being over generous? And if they keep saying no, 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 then I think this is the time when you have to reflect back to saying, well, I hate being judgmental, but in my mind, you're not quite at the standard that you feel you are. Now, bugger off,
Okay.
don't bother me. I wouldn't say that.
Nick, how would you?
Sorry, did you say it was Tony had put this in? Did he actually?
No, David.
Has he had somebody do that?
David Allen's put this one in. Could you just
David,
back with it, David? Have you actually had this happen? Just a quick yes or no, and then I'll know that you've got that. Thanks, David. So go on, Nick. How would you tackle that?
Very much the same as what Neil was saying. I think sometimes you just got to step back and you got to find out whether they're just being flippant or they genuinely believe that. And you'd have to make them think back to part of the driving where maybe it wasn't as safe as they thought it might have been. Because the perfect driver doesn't exist. I'm working on it.
Yeah. It wasn't a bad drive the other day to the station.
Thank you. Yeah, but it was in my automatic, so I wasn't going to stall, was I? I'm looking at the time, Ed, and we need to wrap this up soon.
Yeah. Right, yeah, just very quickly, for mine, if that's a 10 out of 10, and it was a 10 out of 10, what I look at is how are you going to maintain it? What do you need to continue doing, and what were the good aspects of it? Because sometimes genuinely it is 10 out of 10 and it was the perfect maneuver. They didn't make a mistake, or the situation they dealt with, you couldn't have dealt with it any better. So it's getting them to understand the positive aspects of the drive that they did. How did they do it? So that's a different slant to look at it from as well. Does that answer your question there, David?
Can I just...
Go on, Neil.
Can I just come in there and say what I have done is I would say, well, just hop around the driver's seat. I'm going to show you how I would do it, and I'd like you to mark me out of 10. Then I would do it. Yeah. They would mark me, and then say, what is the difference between the way I've just done it to the way you've done it?
That's a really good one.
Reevaluate and go back and do it again.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. Okay. Just very quickly,
there's always different strategies and tools in the box, isn't there?
And this is the good thing about this is when you've got three of us that we've all got a different view as well, and each and every one of them will work, and it's putting your own slant on these things, isn't it? And listening. Some stuff you'll take away from this and think it's great. Yes, I'll use it. Other stuff you might be thinking that might not work for me, and I don't like that, and that's perfectly okay. Just like the learners do. Yeah, they'll take stuff from the mum, the dad, the parents, the friends, other parts of the family, other people, what they see happening on the road. Some of it they'll use, some of it they won't.
Yeah, can I just ask, Ed, if you could be so good as to ask our listeners if they would evaluate us and just send us an email to let us know exactly how they feel what we've got on tonight.
Oh dear.
Yeah. That'd be quite an interesting one. Out of 10. Out of 10, how was our performance?
I'm a little bit. 1.
11. 11.
So it would be.
We need to wrap this up now, guys.
It would be really interesting to get some feedback.
So
Dave Allen has said yes 3 times. It's happened. Thank you from Daniel. Thank you from Dave Allen. Frank Wadd's typed an 8. Yeah, so it's an 8. So thank you, Frank.
Oh, Frank.